What happened to you in July of 1994?
July 4th, 1994, I went to a barbecue with some friends, and some guys were robbing the house that we were having this party at. We came back from the store and we saw these guys essentially taking a bunch of possessions out of the house. And the thing erupted into this big fight. I definitely went in excited to fight. Yeah, I've been involved in fights before, and I had an adrenaline-seeking thing. Essentially what happened was my friends took off, and I ended up in a fight with like 4 or 5 guys. Knives came out, bottles. My father's from Buenos Aires. My dad is a theoretical physicist. It was really early in chaos theory. And so growing up, in our home, you know, we had scientists over for dinner, and graduate students would come over for barbecues and things like that. Yeah, so my dad moved to the States on a naval scholarship, went to school in Philadelphia, met my mom in New York, and they fell in love and moved to California and had my sister and me, and grew up at a time when Palo Alto wasn't this super wealthy community. I had a pretty standard childhood. We ate dinner together every night. So, you know, it was a reasonably healthy, happy home. And then when I turned 13, 14, my parents divorced, and it was a very high conflict divorce. And he moved overseas, he moved to Denmark. And my mom was really struggling with the breakup. And so at a pretty young age, I started taking the 7F bus up to San Francisco and hanging around in Embarcadero.
So where better to skate than downtown in the big business area? And in the heart of city Slickersville, the Plaza, Embarcadero, EMB, skateboard mecca.
This is the now famous EMB crowd. So this was the birth of a huge movement of skateboarders that became professionals. Like, so you'd see the young Danny Way would come through town, or you had Rob Dyrdek, I remember when he came through. And wow. So all these names that eventually became popular during the kind of X Games era. But at that time it was really underground. And so it was this pack of maybe 100 guys, and it was run like a little city, and it was chaos. It was like there was fights, and there was drinking, and there was lawlessness. There was also a lot of amazing skateboarding. In that time, I saw some interesting things. First of all, I learned what it was to be parentless. Growing up in Palo Alto, it was like soccer games and AYSO and, you know, swim club, and all of a sudden I realized, you know, I don't have to be home at any particular time, or, you know, none of these kids are going to school. And so it was a kind of big group of truants. And I was drifting further and further away from any kind of academic rigor. So I stopped going to school, doing a lot of skateboarding, and the whole thing of being truant got me in some trouble. I got put away for a little while. The school picked up on the fact, my high school picked up on the fact that I wasn't going. They called me in at some point. I was sitting down with a school counselor, and they had this guy in the room with me. This guy was sitting in the corner, and he didn't introduce himself. And pretty soon I realized, I was like, I think they're gonna take me away. Like, I started to realize, because they realized my mom wasn't really able to control me, wasn't really in a place to support me at that time. And that's what they did. They took me away. They took me to a place up the peninsula, which was not a jail, and it wasn't a hospital. It was just sort of a place where they put kids that were
like some kind of juvie warehousing situation.
Yeah, a lot of psychologists, a lot of locks on doors. It was locked down. And the first night there, I remember I had a roommate who was like really into cutting on himself, that kind of thing. And he told me, he's like, look, if you just do what they say here, you'll be out of here in like a month. And if you don't, you're gonna be here a very long time. I had no one to call. I called my skateboard team manager out of sympathy, not because I was any good. I'd got put on a wheel company and a truck company for skateboarding. And I called the guy and I said, I don't know what to do. I'm in this place. And I'll never forget, he said, look, I can barely take care of myself, and you're the most normal guy I know. And I realized at that point, I'm like, I'm really alone here. So the long and short of it was, I did the work. I put my trust in the counselors that were there. They seemed like good people. And, you know, I did the work, but it's part of an agreement. I had to do weekly therapy. And I was fortunate enough that I got placed working with somebody who understood my particular needs, really encouraged me to start exploring my mind. Certainly the situation I was in, but encouraged me to start meditating. He gave me John Kabat-Zinn's book, Wherever You Go, There You Are. He saw how much physical energy I had,
and he encouraged me to start running. Anyway, in those years, I'd love to say that I got right back into school, but I really didn't. I didn't perform well in school. I was getting into fights a lot. I was troubled. I was, I've never been a drug alcohol guy, but I dabbled in some substance abuse back then. And got, my girlfriend pregnant. Like, there was a bunch of things that I look back on, and I was really wayward. I was very serious about fitness. I was very serious about the girlfriend. I mean, I'd wake up on Sunday morning, run to her house, run 6 miles, wash her Ford Bronco while she was at church, just to show her like I'm a devoted, hardworking guy. Because her dad hated me. He recorded our phone conversations. And and discovered all sorts of stuff. He had every right to hate me, right? So I was a punk. I was getting in fights. He had a daughter, and he had every right, and I think was reasonable in wanting to have her be with somebody who was really solid. She went off to college, and I felt pretty alone. So I traveled down to where she went to school, UC Santa Barbara, and I lived in the parking lot outside her dorm.
I just wanted to be near her. She was my family at that point.
I had to figure out a way to get into college. Yeah. Because she was there. And I didn't think I'd go to college, but I thought, okay, what am I good at? Basically nothing. But I can lift weights and I can run. I like hanging out with friends and working in big teams of guys. I'd done a little bit of that, skateboard shops and factories, and I thought I'll become a firefighter. So I started taking fire science classes at Mission College in the South Bay. Loved the work, just felt like it was just the greatest. Okay. But then someone out at Mission College said, listen, you stand a much better chance of going up the ranks in the fire department if you have a bachelor's degree. And so I took the SAT. I have no idea how it happened, but I somehow managed to break 1,000, not by much. I applied to UC Santa Barbara, and somehow I got in.
Lord knows how I got in. I did eventually graduate high school, barely. Got in, and then after a year, I just completely flailed it. I wasn't going to class. I was getting into fights. A lot of that kind of mischief and kind of wildness was still in me. What ended up happening was I got into a physical altercation on July 4th, 1994 with a bunch of guys.
Fortunately, I stayed on 2 feet and nobody got badly hurt or killed. The police showed up, and actually because of the fact that they were robbing us, they actually congratulated me. I'll never forget, this is actually what made me feel worst of all. It was one of the police officers said, nice work or something like that. And I just realized that I was in serious trouble. I'm 19, I barely finished high school. I barely scraped through my first year of college. I'm living in a squat with my ferret. My girlfriend had left me. I didn't do anything well. I didn't know how to do anything well. And so that day, and I still have this letter, I actually sat down and I wrote a letter to myself and to my parents saying that I was gonna turn things around. I decided that day that I would use the one power that I seem to have, which is to remember facts and information. And what I did was I left Santa Barbara. I took a leave of absence, went to a local community college in the Bay Area. I did 2 quarters there. I decided to live alone in a studio apartment, and I would set a timer for several hours, and I wouldn't allow myself to get up. I was allowed to listen to Rancid on repeat and Bob Dylan. That's all. I wouldn't even allow myself to change music. And then I would just sit there and I would read my textbooks, underline my textbooks, write my textbooks, just started studying like a maniac. First psychology, then biology. I eventually fell in love with neuroscience and related themes of endocrinology. And I just decided I'm gonna get straight A marks, I'm gonna go to graduate school, I'm gonna get a PhD. I should mention there were people that came along at various times and helped me, role models, mentors, people that spotted that, but it started with a switch that flipped on July 4th, 1994, and getting in a bad fight, and here I am.